morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've got a lot of great news to get to today, lots of exciting things to talk about. I'm joined again by Nayyera. Thank you for being in studio with us.
Good to be back with you, Robby. What a day.
Yes, let's get right to it. So for the first time, a Democratic leader has alluded to Joe Biden not necessarily being the party's nominee after all. Now, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Jamie Raskin, told MSNBC's Velshi on Sunday there are serious conversations happening right now within the party behind the scenes. How to move forward after Biden's completely botched debate performance last week. Well, let's watch.
Regardless of what President Biden decides, our party is going to be unified, and our party also needs him at the very center of our deliberations and our campaign. And so whether he's the candidate or someone else is the candidate, he is going to be the keynote speaker at our convention.
Now, whether intended or not, Velshi brushed off Raskin's comments. Maybe the comment that stung most of all from the White House was from MSNBC's Morning Joe. Now, it's widely reported that President Biden often confides in host Joe Scarborough, a former GOP congressman. Let's listen to what Morning Joe had to say.
I love Joe Biden and Jill, and I will gladly debate anybody, anytime, any place, anywhere over the issue of whether Joe Biden has been the most effective president. Donald Trump lied over and over and over and over again. And Joe Biden couldn't respond to any of those lies. In fact, as the New York Times said, he spent much of the night with his mouth agape and his eyes darting back and forth. He couldn't fact check anything Donald Trump said. And not only that, he missed one layup after another after another. He couldn't respond effectively to Donald Trump trying to overthrow American democracy on January 6th. He couldn't respond effectively to Donald Trump's continued stream of lies about his own record. And he couldn't even respond effectively on the issue of abortion, where for some reason he darted wildly to the issue of immigration.
David Axelrod posted, quote, reality check, Biden is the nominee of the Democratic Party, nominated by voters in primaries across the country. Is that a fact check? Unless the POTUS himself decides to quit, which he won't, that issue's settled. The discussion that is going on now was timely a year ago when few wanted to have it. It's largely irrelevant today. Now, NBC News politics managing editor said, quote, new Biden's campaign manager held a tense call with top donors today outlining what would happen to the campaign infrastructure should Biden step aside. In short, the war chest goes to Kamala Harris. Now, one participant said some donors even asked for refunds for their contributions. And host of Pod Save America says, quote, pod is up, take a listen for our full thoughts, but obviously that debate was an effing disaster. We have to beat Donald Trump. We have to have a nominee who can do that. And since we haven't had the convention yet, it would be absurd if Democrats didn't at least have a serious discussion about whether Joe Biden, who's a wonderful human being and has been a great president, is up for the job. John Favreau then backpedaled, saying, quote, it seems like Biden and his team think that despite what we all saw on Thursday night, the president is still the best candidate to do that. Like we've said on the pod, that's their call, and if they stick with it, we'll certainly keep doing everything humanly possible to help reelect the president, including encouraging the hundreds of thousands of voters, volunteers who helped elect Biden in 2020 to again donate their time and money to winning in November. Stakes are too high to do anything else.
Now, the New York Times editorial board came out the next day saying Biden shouldn't run either. In a piece titled, "To Serve His Country, President Biden Should Leave the Race." The paper wrote, quote, as it stands, the president is engaged in a reckless gamble. There are Democratic leaders better equipped to present clear, compelling, and energetic alternatives to a second Trump presidency. There is no reason for the party to risk the stability and security of the country by forcing voters to choose between Mr. Trump's deficiencies and those of Mr. Biden. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote that while Biden's a good man and a fine president, It's time that they move aside, adding, quote, to give America the greatest shot possible of deterring the Trump threat in November, the president has to come forward and declare that he will not be running for re-election and is releasing all of his delegates for the Democratic National Convention. Now, despite the calls for him to bow out, they're intensifying. There is no sign that President Biden plans to do so, at least as of right now. A new CBS post-debate poll reveals voters do not want Biden to run. 72% of respondents said he should not run, while 28% still say he should. The poll also shows that nearly half of Democratic voters now think Biden should not run for re-election. Polling is always going to be up and down, but the reality of Biden's age has not changed since he first ran. If anything, he's gotten older. That debate was painful for anybody even who cared about him personally or cares about elders and how they appear in public. The fact that you had a younger generation of Democrats, the folks who came in and were inspired by Obama, let's not forget, Obama was the insurgency against the establishment, which was the Hillary team. The fact that they came out publicly and said of their former vice president that this is a serious conversation to have, and then Obama's campaign manager says, well, nobody wanted to have this conversation a year ago. That's when you should have had it. I'm like, there was a lot of people who wanted to have that conversation a year ago. A lot of people within the Democratic Party, within the left. This is not even necessarily a third party question. It's a how do you manage to be the party of diversity, of multi-generational coalitions, of the working class, and completely ignore in your party process the thoughts, the voices, the choices of the rising electorate that is under the age of 65. I mean, that is not just a nobody wanted to have this conversation. That is putting a blanket over something everybody within the party has known has been a problem for many years.
It's with the whole they should have had this conversation before thing. It's kind of like that meme that's like the best time to delete this was 5 minutes ago. The second best time is now. The best time to have the conversation about Joe Biden being too old to run was in fact a year ago, but the second best time is now. Like it can still get worse. And after that debate performance, no one has any confidence, least of all the electorate, that Joe Biden could be president for another 4 years. The performance was abysmal. It's not possible to put successful spin on it, but the things they've come up to defend it are just totally unacceptable. The debate didn't happen between, did you hear this, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., which are the times at which he is high functioning. I think the job of being president occasionally occurs outside of the 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Do you remember the 3 a.m. phone call thing? Who do you want to pick up the phone at 3 a.m. and take that call when it comes to...
Joe Biden's going to say something about beating the hell out of Medicare at that time of night. Yeah, these conversations should have been had a long time ago. And again, they didn't have a real, for the people saying, well, he won the primaries, the voters decided on him. I mean, not really, not this time around. Yes, he absolutely won in 2020 through the primary, through a robust process. He actually did not automatically get the establishment support until there was a lot of movement in the direction of Bernie Sanders and everyone else had cleared the field, and then the establishment came home to Joe Biden. But he fought for it and he won it. This time it was a coronation. It was the attitude, well, he's the incumbent president. He gets to run for re-election. They didn't really hold a competitive primary. They did not have debates. What if he had debated Dean Phillips or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. a year ago when they were both running in the Democratic, ostensibly as Democrats, against him? There was no actual process, a debate. You could have seen if he'd had a debate performance like this back then, there would have been time to do something to fix this ticket. Maybe there isn't now, but he is on pace to lose unless something dramatic happens.
So interestingly enough, if you take a generic poll of different folks who've been mentioned, whether it be Kamala Harris or Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom on the Democratic side as alternates to Biden, and put them up against Trump, you pretty much still have a 1 or 2 point difference. So the way that it is working right now for active voters, or at least people who are answering polls these days, is it is a party thing, right? So they will take any party person and believe the same thing about a person on that ticket from as a presidential candidate as they will about Trump. So many, many people could, in theory, including Joe Biden, just have a D next to their name and beat Trump. I think part of what people are challenged by right now is that whole message of, the heartbeat away from the presidency, even though that was used against John McCain, and that idea of, oh, really, you want Sarah Palin as president next? This seems so much more real with a Biden in day-to-day terms, that heartbeat away from the presidency. And for better or for worse, Kamala Harris does not have that gravitas, the appeal, whatever you want to call it.
The whole thing gets a disaster.
The Democratic Party. Now, I think she has a very important skill set. I think she's a very smart person. I think that she does have people who love her, like she's got the K-hive. But there is no, it is not an automatic, if something happens to Joe Biden, everybody would immediately be okay within the party. I'm not even talking the broader electorate, within the party with Kamala Harris. That's the problem with these party structures and how things happen. And it's like, oh my God, 2 years before we even know what's happening in the country, we know who's going to be who the party nominee is going to be. I mean, I get it. Incumbents, they worked for it. They did a good job. I get all of how party structures work, but this is the problem of how party structures work, right? Like, this is a very different moment right now than what we were facing as a country 2 years ago. And to not have an opportunity to chime in or to have even, let's call them shorter election cycles, right? Where in real time, you can actually pick and understand who you're voting for and who you put forward. Last thing I will say on that, it's not like the Trump has been anointed by the GOP for some time. So this is very much a complaint about party structures, period. And my resignation that this might not be changeable before November.
Yeah, I mean, on the Trump side, I mean, they did have a competitive primary process. There, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie and Mike Pence and a bunch of other people ran against Trump. They did a bunch of debates. They asked voters, Republican primary voters in the states, and they, not all of them, but a solid majority wanted to stick by Trump, and so Trump is the nominee again. Nothing like that took place on the Democratic side.
Well, none of the people that are being mentioned right now, by the way, actually stood up and say, hey, we would run against Joe Biden. Everybody that's being discussed right now, whether they're Democratic governors or elsewhere, are people who themselves said, no, thank you, I'm not going to run against Joe Biden. So that's another layer of this, is the party itself.
It's a mess.
The way the party structured this is the problem.
It's a mess. All right, we will continue to discuss this, and we have much more coming up on Rising. Stay tuned.